Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is hashtag No Limits, and I am your host, Shelly Kino. Hashtag No Limits is a program on which I interview people who society has placed limits upon, but who have busted through those limits, or people or organizations that are helping those bust through those limits. Ophelia says in Hamlet, "We know who we are, but not who we will become." And I believe that to be 100% true, and that there isn't a better example of that than the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. The caterpillar literally dissolves into its cells, reforms itself into the butterfly, and then has to fight its way out of the cocoon in order for its wings to be strong enough to fly. And none of that can be easy. And so neither is busting through limits that society places upon a person. And so today, my guest is Abbey Butcher, and Abbey and I haven't officially met, did we? Or did we meet last summer?
Nope, I
Okay.
didn't get to go.
Okay. So the reason I was questioning whether or not we had met last summer is because Abbey is also a master IEP coach. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There's a lot of things that Abbey and I have in common, and I'm really excited for her to share her story and for us to really get to talk and know one another, and for you to just learn a few more things about more people busting through limits. Abbey, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, my phone's going off. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, very well. It's very hot. I think our high today is supposed to be 98,
Ooh.
and that's without humidity. So with humidity,
Ooh.
we're gonna feel like probably 105 to 110.
Ooh. We are in a reprieve right now, so I will
Yeah,
enjoy it while it's here.
yeah. We had that the last couple of days, so it may be coming to you soon.
Yeah. Darn.
So we talked about the fact that you are another master IEP coach, but tell us the other things that are some of the reasons that you're here. Tell us about you and a bit about your family. And hi, Fran.
So I am a master IEP coach, and kind of my story of my family is how I ended up in that situation, or chose to go that path. I didn't just land there. But I have three kids, and I'm a special education teacher by trade. I've long been fascinated by behavior and have worked both in the private sector and then in the public schools, and learned all kinds of things. And none of it prepared me to parent a child who had some pretty big behaviors.
Mm.
And so when he was 3 and 4, we started really noticing that things weren't matching up. While we had these amazing, beyond his age verbal skills, we could have a whole conversation and then it would end up in a meltdown anyway. And then our
Mm.
meltdowns were getting bigger. And they didn't necessarily have a pattern, but they were becoming problematic. And so I think the first time we really hit that limit is we went to our pediatrician because we weren't in the school system yet. And I had a pediatrician basically tell me it was my fault. If he
Oh,
could
good grief.
control himself sometimes and not others, then it must be my parenting. And I know I'm
And
not the only one who's heard
I'm gonna time out right there,
that.
because how old is your son that you're talking about?
He's 11 and a half now. So this,
So within the last like 8 to 10-ish years, this
yep,
was still being said to
yep,
parents.
yep. And that
Wow.
isn't even, so he was about 4. We were there in his checkup, and we were kind of like, we knew something was up, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And it's very, very different working in this world of behavior and
Mhm.
living in it. Like, I don't care how much training you have, the chronic stress of raising a child with a disability doesn't matter what you know.
Right.
So we ended up switching medical providers anyway. I had a pediatrician who was a lot more supportive in our new provider, but unfortunately it was big medical system. And so we struggled to find support within that system.
Mhm.
We couldn't pick who, it was like who was available.
Right.
And that led us to attempting a social skills group, which that provider was great, but then there wasn't any consistency. Then she switched roles, and we landed with this psychologist who tried to use signs with my extremely highly verbal child.
Oh.
And when I called her on it, I said, we don't need that. Like, he can communicate that way. And so her response to me, basically, when she could see I was getting frustrated, was, it's just hard to parent a child like that. And she's saying it in front of
My
my child.
gosh.
So, needless to say, we never went back.
Yeah.
And as much as that sucked, it was the best thing for our family because that led me to find my own information. And that's where I landed in the brain-based understanding of behavior. And so I started reading anything and everything I could. Ross Greene was one of the first books, The Explosive Child, that I finally was like, somebody gets my child. Like they understand the world I'm living in. So I started making connections really quickly between things that were now beginning to help my child and the students I had in my classroom. And at that time, I had a group of students who just struggled behaviorally, like to the point where I never knew, middle schoolers, if we were going to walk in and I was breaking up a fight or if we were going to achieve a lesson that day. And
Gotcha.
so I started digging into whatever trainings I could find, finding other people along this mindset, and became increasingly frustrated with how behavior was approached in the school system. And there was still very much this mindset that you're making a bad choice, you don't want to do it. And it was all about this will, as opposed to there were deficits that were preventing children from doing what we expected them to do. And so I knew I wanted to do more, but I didn't know how to do this. Like I was a sped teacher. What else can you do with
Right.
sped teacher licensing? And so
Exactly.
we ended up moving across state lines, and we came across a fantastic chiropractor who specialized in neurodevelopmental disabilities.
Oh,
And she's built a program around help, like filling in gaps in neurodevelopment. And
mhm.
that was life changing for our family. And that also increased my understanding of the nervous system and the brain and how all of this stuff is connected and how wrong the school system is getting it sometimes with their
Mhm.
old school paradigms. And so,
Yeah.
on the personal side, my son went from at that point in time putting holes in my walls, having 2 3 hour explosive episodes, to
Yeah.
3 years later, he's now virtually indistinguishable from his peers and he still needs some ports on a 504, but it completely changed the trajectory of our life. And so, kind of towards the end of that, Master IEP coach landed in my lap, and it was exactly what I needed because I found a tribe of people who really wanted to champion children and a place where I could take this brain based understanding and begin to apply it and help families get their needs met. So, kind of, I still am in the school system, and my behavior plans look very different now than they once did. They're very, very driven about helping kids to regulate, very
Right.
driven on the things we adults need to do to support kids, as opposed to
Yep.
putting all the onus on a small child in
Oh,
some
yeah.
cases.
You're
And
like you're
so
so speaking my language right now.
I
It's just
know,
it's
yeah,
amazing.
and it's pretty cool to watch. Like I've learned how to apply this brain-based understanding to reading a psych report, so I can look at a cognitive assessment and tell a parent, particularly like short-term memory.
Mhm.
More often than not, if I turn to a parent and say, "Hey, this is what the score is," I'm guessing your child cannot visualize and predict outcomes of their behavior, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, no." I said, "Yeah, here's what we need to do for accommodation," and it's life-changing for kids.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's really driven what I do as an IEP coach because I know parents are having those same battles. I know they're being told by teachers, doctors, other people that, yeah, it's something you're doing. You should probably fix yourself and then your kid will be fine.
Mhm.
And which is just not true. There is a reason. Behavior always communicates, it always has a purpose. It just doesn't
Yep.
always serve our purpose as adults. Um,
Exactly.
so that's kind of how we got to be where we are and why I do what I do now. So,
Wow. So much in there. So yeah, I had Kim from Lives in the Balance, the Ross Green nonprofit foundation, on hashtag No Limits. Oh gosh, 5 maybe 6 weeks ago. And yeah, I mean, same thing. I mean, she just totally was talking my language. And it's really interesting. When I went through school 100 years ago, they still, in my state, when I started, you could get licensed in behavior, you could get licensed in learning disabilities, you could get licensed in the moderate, mild, severe
mm-hmm.
category. Well, my schooling had some bumps and intermissions. And by the time I finished, they had changed their licensing to you were just everything in special education. But when I was looking at going for those individual licenses, behavior was the track that I had started on because I just found it so fascinating. And one of the reasons I found it fascinating is because an early experience that I had in education as a paraprofessional was we had a student who sounds kind of similar to your son in the sense that he would have these episodes that could last anywhere from 5 minutes to 4 hours, and they would happen multiple times a day. And the severity could be anywhere from just shutting down to eloping and destroying the classroom and screaming at the top of his lungs. And then eventually, after the teacher at that time, because as I said, I was the paraprofessional, and a few other teachers, and then a behavioral specialist was called in because, again, this was 100 years ago, and we didn't have BCBAs at the time. They weren't titled that, at least. Came in and gave us like, hey, this kid is missing some skills. And we need to get these skills into this kid. And while you're doing that, do this. And the change in one school year, and it wasn't even a full school year. Like, we called that specialist in January, and by April we had so few behavioral episodes, it just floored me of how, like, if you can do I always say I turn into a toddler when I am working with kids with behavior, because I go, why? Well, why are they doing that? Well, why are they doing that? Well, why are they having this issue? Well, why? And I don't stop the whys until we get all the way down to the nitty gritty.
And that's one of the things when I have a lot of my clients have behavioral needs, because that's my heart and my passion. And one of the things that I have to coach and teach them on is many school districts will require an FBA or a functional behavior analysis to get any kind of behavior support. And so I always have to teach my parents before I can teach the district early on that this is a necessary step to get where we want to go, but be aware it's limiting, because they never ask the why. And they're going to put all the behavior into X, Y, and Z. And so once they understand that mindset, that it's a means to an end, then we just get right back to championing the things that the child does need. Really, when that class I was telling you about where they broke out in fights sometimes, what was really cool was, so I ended up doing collaborative problem solving training through Massachusetts General, through their training program, which is similar to what Lives in the Balance does, but slightly different. And so I came in fresh and hot in February, had this group of kids that like just couldn't regulate, and, you know, their competing needs fed off of each other. And we literally threw everything that was curriculum based out the window for that moment, and had days where we just did self-regulating activities. And I would pull in content-based coloring just as a simple strategy. And it was really, really cool to watch the dynamic shift, because all of a sudden it was this safe spot where demands were appropriate to what the kids could do in the moment. And we took that group of kids, we wrapped the year up like 4 or 5 months later with a novel study where I had kids writing multiple paragraph essays who supposedly couldn't produce a sentence at the start of the year. And it was simply the act of me, like I did more changing than they did, and how I was teaching and what I was doing.
Yes.
And, it meets resistance. I had a para who tried her best to jump on my bandwagon, but lacked understanding and had done what she'd done for a long, long time. And we had some pretty tough moments of where I finally had to tell her, you know what, you can take a break if you need one too. It's okay.
Yeah.
And so we had moments where she'd kicked me out of the room by the end of the year because it was a tense moment. She goes, you need the break right now. I got this. And so it's really powerful, because kids then get to really show what they know, because they're not fighting to be seen and heard as people. You know, when we stop looking at them as a behavior and understand the place that this behavior is meeting a need right now. And while it makes me as an adult uncomfortable, oftentimes it's developmentally appropriate for where a student is in their brain development.
Right. Yeah, so. That's, oh gosh, yeah. So there's so much there again. So one of the things that the CPS, which is the collaborative, tell me what the letters stand for.
Um, so collaborative problem solving
Problem
comes
solving.
from
Yeah.
Massachusetts General. I can't remember. Lives in the Balance is similar yet slightly different in their titling.
Right.
Foundationally, it's the same general idea that, there's lagging skills in these
Right.
neurocognitive areas.
Yeah. And I tell you, I don't know if I said lives or lives in the balance, because every time, whichever way it comes into my brain, I'm like, no, that's the wrong one. Say it the other way.
Right.
And I never know how it's going to come out of my mouth, because
I
it
actually don't
both,
know if
to
I'm
me,
right.
both ways work with the
Yeah.
title of their nonprofit. But Kim had said something, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but the concept is that we have to get people from thinking that kids don't want to behave and therefore they don't, to kids can't behave and we have to work on skills.
Yep.
Or deficits, or whatever it is that they're needing.
Yeah. Kids do well if they can, skill, not will. Like, those are concepts I see come out of that methodology. And it really comes back to, it is a skill deficit. And so, there's excellent tools within that line of thinking that help people to see that. And I've used some of them, and it's pretty cool when teachers start looking at these behavioral characteristics, and you're like, hey, look at this. Look at all these visual processing difficulties that are popping up.
Mm-hmm.
Or look at, they're really not predicting. Their social skills really aren't there, and they're less formal than those standardized assessment pieces. So I often will include those as case management into my cases. I haven't yet brought them into coaching because it's a slightly different role for me to say, hey, school district, please use this.
Right.
But I certainly bring those conversations up, and we ask those questions. And I did have a client where we did an FBA, and they wrote a behavior plan, and they only wanted to look at the FBA and refused to put into the behavior plan the sensory considerations or the language considerations, all of which will have impact on behavior. If you are struggling to communicate, that is incredibly frustrating.
Yep.
Or if someone is telling you things so fast that you can't process them, that's frustrating. And, and we as adults, we're the same. I have a limit, and when I hit my limit, then I'm going to probably make a poor choice. Sometimes as a mom, I yell at my kids, and I have to apologize and say, ooh, mom was in her brainstem. So sorry. But we've also, like in our family, we've learned to recognize things we need to do to regulate. For example, my son, we found out he would make sound effects, and very common amongst some disability categories to make sound effects or verbal stems. Mm-hmm. So what we learned is that's actually a tool he's using to regulate himself by controlling the auditory input he gets.
Oh, sure, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it does to me.
Oh, yeah, it made perfect sense to me.
Right.
So one of the accommodations I started recommending when someone says that, because often you'll see, oh, get noise canceling headphones. It's too loud for them. Well, it works sometimes. Mm-hmm. If the kid just needs to tune it out. But if you're a kid who needs to control your auditory input, it doesn't work. What you actually need is headphones where you can put music on and control the auditory input. Right. So through this process, we learned, guess what? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I am the same way. So it's not uncommon in our house to be playing a board game where my son needs to make some noise while he's processing his next move, because we like those strategy games. Right. And we're all sitting around the table with our own headphones and music playing.
Oh, wow.
Because his noise sets off I get dysregulated. And so then I don't want to play the game, which is totally eliminates that need for connection we have. And so, it's just tips and tools like that you have to understand what regulates a person. How do we help them regulate? Where are they in their basic brain development? Because sometimes we're having difficulties because we skip something. In the case of my children, we had retained primitive reflexes. Those are supposed to be integrated by about a year. Mm-hmm. If they're not, they lead to things like behavior problems, dysregulation, all kinds of stuff.
Wow. That's so cool. And I mean, it's cool that you know that stuff and that you can integrate that into, not that you all deal with that, but that.
I have always said, when I crossed the threshold from teacher into special needs parent, how dumb I was as a teacher and how much I didn't know about what my families were going through, because I hadn't walked that journey. And so I have yet to meet a special needs parent that is like, yes, I'm so glad that I'm here and we have this disability or that one. However, I have never met a group of a more fierce tribe that will fight for their members. And so, they're fiercely loyal. Like, don't mess with my kid. And so it really changed me as an educator, not just with families with disabilities, but families in general. I don't think the education system gives them enough credit for being the expert on their child, even if they didn't go to school to study how do I teach reading. And so, I love the case management side because I get to get into understanding that family's journey and being able to advocate for that child from within the system. I really love it on the IEP coaching side because I'm no longer bound by school district rules.
Right.
And so I can share freely that, like with a family, hey, if you haven't looked at chiropractic care for your nervous system, you need to. 100%. Probably the whole family. You all have a nervous system. So I love the freedom to be able to share some of those things that you can't say as a teacher because then the school district has to pay for it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So.
And doing, and I don't know how much you know about like sleep studies and how much the sleep and the brain are connected, and this, that so often our kiddos with disabilities also are sleep deprived and have sleep issues, and to have those kinds of tests. But you can't say that as a teacher because again, you're on the hook to pay for it.
I haven't gotten all the data back, so I'm super excited for that. We just went through sleep study stuff for our whole family because through our dentist. So someone else who's in this brain-based space with me had recommended Vivos technology, which comes through the dental industry.
Okay.
Which was enough for me to go seek it because I trusted the source of it. But I had learned over the years, like things like mouth breathing, restless sleep, so then I went into her education and it was very brain-based, nervous system-based. And I knew enough to know that if you are not truly getting into rest and digest in your sleep, you're going to have problems because your brain is in fight or flight at that point. And that's not what sleep is designed to do. So it's been pretty fascinating. After her education session, I'd gone in for 2 of my kids because I knew off the top of my head there was stuff there. I went through the education and was like, oh, no, we need to do all 5 of us. And it's been fascinating what we're finding. So, and it was like, no wonder we're waking up tired or we're grumpy or just, I have my 11-year-old now acts like an 80-year-old man with aches and pains. And it was funny to start teasing him, but it's super problematic. We're finding out there's apnea episodes, and people like my sister was like, oh yeah, I think a lot of people have apnea. I'm like, that doesn't make it okay.
Right?
Common, normal, doesn't make it okay. And so, it is the connection, as you said, to many individuals with disabilities and having these chronic ongoing sleep issues. That was another one that never, my kids have been at regular dental care since they were 1.
Sure.
Nobody has ever asked me, how are they sleeping? The medical community has never asked me, oh, how's sleep? And so, I'm hopeful that's a missing link in what we need to continue to have healthy nervous systems and continue optimal brain development. But it's another one that, I can tell a family as a coach, hey, here's another tool in your toolbox, but you can't as a teacher.
Right, exactly. And what you said too about the mouth breathing, I didn't realize that either until I was out of teaching, and how much that can play a part in development and speech and sleep and behaviors and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like you in the sense that I find what the brain does and how it acts in all of the different things very, very interesting. And sorry, I need to pause for a second. And I just want to say thank you, Bridget and Fran, for commenting, and welcome to both of you. I appreciate you guys being here. And I know there's some others watching. You just haven't commented yet, which is perfectly fine. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I saw you. And so I used to go to, on all the times we would have professional development times, if there was something about the brain, I was going because it just fascinated me. And there were so many teachers, that they would go to here's, a fascinating new way to teach reading. Oh, here's a fascinating new thing to do with math. Here's a fascinating new thing to do with science or social studies. And it was always subject specific.
Mm-hmm.
And not that that isn't good, but we need to know what's happening, what's causing all of these things. There's so many things that play into how we learn, when we learn, what ways we learn best, that if we're not addressing those or considering those
Mm-hmm.
when we're planning our lessons, when we're planning our classrooms, when we're planning our school buildings and our school day, I'm sure you also know about the time of day that we send kids to school now is not the right time of the day to send kids to school.
Nope.
And it's always irritated me since I found this information out that we have to do things as special education teachers that are, and as general education, scientifically and research based, and yet we have all of this science and research that says this is not the best time of the day to teach our kids, sending them to school at 6:30 or 7:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
We need to give them more activity during the day. And the education system doesn't follow their own guidelines in general. I mean, teachers do because we're made to, but the system doesn't.
Well, no, and then they keep putting more and more standards, and we have too many here, so let's just shove them down. So you run into like developmentally not appropriate we're teaching things. And you're right, most teachers are doing everything they can to take here's the expectation and bring it to appropriate level for the students and build in that required movement and things like that. But it's incredibly hard. I was having a discussion with a teacher friend yesterday, and she's a special ed teacher, and she was like, I don't know, maybe I'll just go teach math. And I said, you could. I said, but here's the thing. I said, you're a great math teacher and you're a great special ed teacher, but you are not going to have the flexibility in general ed that you have in special ed because your administrator is responsible for making sure you teach those standards. And so at least there's some freedom as a SPED teacher to where I'm confident enough in my skills to say, you know what, we're not doing that lesson. We've got to regulate today. And you don't get that luxury as a gen ed teacher. And so it's understanding those pieces. But going back to your training thing, it reminded me, I'm like you. If it's about behavior, if it's about the brain, I'm there, always seeking to gain some knowledge. And I actually had an administrator tell me, he goes, I'd really like to see you go to some language arts-based stuff since that's what you teach. And I looked at him and I said, I could. I said, I got a lot of teaching strategies after 10 years. I said, but if I don't understand why this kid's having this behavior or coming into my room dysregulated every day, I said, if I don't understand that, if I can't help this kid regulate, doesn't matter what teaching strategy I have, it's not going to be effective. And it's probably going to make his behavioral needs worse because I'm not meeting him where he's at in ability. And he was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say to me and just like walked away. And so if you are ahead of the game in the education system, or you're coming at things that are research-based or scientific, but they're not what the norm is, you hit limits there too. And it's hard because then you're in the employer-employee game where I've been to a number of IEP meetings where it would have cost my job to speak up. And that's a really, really hard place to be when you are trying to do right by kids. And as I've gotten older, I care less and I say more.
Right. Yeah.
But, and especially.
And it's really, I mean, it's not that you care less, you actually care more about the students than the district.
Yes. Yeah. But I absolutely love what I do. But, I work in the district because I need a paycheck for my family. Right. And so.
Yeah. So here's a great question. And if either of us had the answer, I think we would probably be millionaires and, hoisted as the heroes of all heroes because, but I mean, do you have like.
I'm with you. And that's a great question, Fran. I don't think there's an educator out there who hasn't asked, how do we get change in the system? It's in reality, it's small and it's going to be slow, but it's one student at a time. It's parents are really going to be the driving change because most educators were at the mercy of this is what your employer says you have to do. And obviously we're coming back with if they're doing illegal things, that's a whole different conversation to just
Right.
not doing the right thing in the right time. But it's unlike other systems, and there are many, many broken systems out there. And unfortunately, they don't even talk to each other. So it's even worse.
Right.
But the special education system is dependent on parents calling out the wrongs. States are not, they're not regulating. They're hoping people are doing the best. And so, it is tiring. It's exhausting. It's
Yeah.
exhausting on the inside and it's exhausting on the outside. And so that's one of the reasons I became an IEP coach is empowering and educating my parents on some of that internal language. And is, one student at a time, it's change. I do as much educating of the districts for my clients as I do of my clients. And it's it sucks. Like I have to tell them it might take us all year to get that request met, but we're going to get it met. And so it's that persistence, it's advocating, helping schools see that parents will always be the best advocate for their child. They are the only ones who truly know the child inside and out across all settings. And so, the more we can get situations like where we can truly partner, the better it is for kids. But it's, any systemic change is slow. I mean,
Yeah.
we are where we are in special ed after, which is relatively young. And we're talking about maybe 20, 30 years, and it's already changed a lot in that time. And it's, I wish we could flip a switch and it's not a fight. I really,
Yeah.
really do. But one thing I can say is that fight is coming inside as well. It's just
Yeah.
sometimes harder to see because as employees, you're bound by what your district says. And so some of us leave and we take the fight elsewhere. Some of us move districts to districts that are more progressive to continue the fight there. But I don't know of an educator that's not fighting on some level.
Right. Yeah. And what you said earlier, Fran she's my partner in Friday with Fran. So she is the
Oh,
mom
cool.
of two now grown children with disabilities. And so she's fought the battle, but it's not over.
Mm-hmm.
Both of, I mean, disabilities don't just magically disappear when they get out of school. So, she's in the more the healthcare system and the out of the education system. But now what do I do with my children that they're out of the education system? Like you said, there are so many broken systems. And I the book that I wrote in 2020, what you mentioned about you thought you had a good idea as a special educator until you became the parent of a child with a disability. I thought, because I had the great privilege of working with my families multiple years. And
Uh-huh.
so I had gotten to know them outside of the school system. I got to know the siblings of my students and the whole family dynamic. And so because of that, I felt like I must have a decent understanding of what their lives are like every day. And had friends and I had family as well, but you don't see your friends and family every day like you see your
Yeah.
students and their families every day. So I always refer to my students, but not everyone in my book was a former student. um, but when I started interviewing these families that are in the book for the book, I was dumbfounded. I felt like, oh my gosh, if I had even a thimbleful of knowledge, that was probably a lot compared to what the reality is. And yeah, I mean, I have nothing but respect for families who are raising or have a member in their family who has whatever disability it is. I don't technically, I was never diagnosed with anxiety as a kid. It wasn't a thing, but I mean,
Mhm.
that is considered a disability. It's not necessarily anything that gets you an IEP, but it is now, something that is debilitating and a disability. And so, I mean, I sort of lived it, but we didn't know it. You
Mhm.
know, we just knew that I was having problems a lot, but we didn't know that it was anything that I could At the school certainly didn't recognize it. Doctors didn't recognize it or didn't know what it was. I had a lot of, and I think my mom did too, of what you went through of being told it's in your head, it's what you're doing, it's nothing that she has or needs, it's what outside forces are or are not doing. And so you know, like I said, I was a kid 100 years ago, and so to hear you talk about that this is still happening, you know, that your son is only 11 and these things, these comments are still being made 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago about, well, it's your parenting. Well, it's tough to parent a child with a disability. That's just, I mean, I'm hoping that those are the exception rather than the rule now, but even to have it as an exception is still too much.
Well, and I think I can't tell you. I have not had a comment like that come up sooner rather than later. We moved about a year ago, and I'm on the fence with the pediatrician I have for my son because I gave him our whole background, and he, as his profession and his expectations, sent it over to developmental peds, and they want to try and get a label. And there is a time and a place. We have not ever needed a label to get what we found worked for our family. And so, I chalked it up to, okay, we had a 1 hour conversation. You really don't understand our journey. And because for my kiddo, doctors, he has a little bit of medical trauma from a previous injury when he was little, but he's scared. And so
right.
when you're down in that fight or flight, you're not showing your best stuff. So I totally empathize that this doctor saw something different than what I'm telling him because he saw the worst of the worst in that moment because we were in stress and crisis. And so, I've gotten a lot pickier when I look for providers for my family. Like, I want to know you have an understanding of the brain and the nervous system. And so when we moved, we very sadly had to leave our chiropractic office that had quite literally radically changed our lives. We were at a place when we landed on their doorstep where my husband and I were seriously considering moving our house into 2 households for the safety of my younger children. Because when we were having these big episodes, I had a 2 and a 5-year-old that were trained to lock themselves in the bathroom because to keep them safe. And so we were like, how are we going to go on? We can't live like this. And so, that's kind of where we were in that state of crisis at that time. And so to move out of the area was both an amazing win because our move into that area was really hard behaviorally. But to be in a place where we could even consider moving and taking another opportunity was a huge, huge win, but also really, really scary because when you find those teams that do work and truly take the time to get you in your situation, it's life-changing. And so we got to this new area, and most parents are like, I need a pediatrician, I need a dentist. And I'm like, no, I need a chiropractor. Pediatrician for 6 months, but I had a chiropractor within a month. And so because I knew we shifted, we had this tremendous change. It had caused all kinds of stress on our nervous system. And we needed to get that back right because if your nervous system's calm, your brain's staying out of fight or flight, then we can move forward because you can't be in stress and growth at the same time. And so I had to address that. It's great. I have a pediatrician for when we are acutely sick. It's typically not my first course of action. And I know that I'm going to meet limitations. And there was a difference. My son had wanted to see a man because we're at that age. And so my girls are with another doctor in the same office, and it was starkly different because one of my daughters also has some sensory and some pertain primitive reflexes. And I went in and I told her our story, and she was like, what do you need from me? And I was like, nothing. I just need you to know I need a partner on my team. I need you to know this is how I'm going to come at that. I will respect if you disagree, but I need you to respect me. And so, I'm on the fence with, it wasn't that this guy was bad.
Right.
I'm going to have to do a lot of different educating and a lot of different advocating with him than I will with this other person. And so, as And it sucks because the medical system isn't gonna, like, they were like, well, if you get this label, then you can get OT or speech. And I was like, haha, you say that.
Right.
But what's the reality? Like, because I'm watching the reality in education where we're short staffed and there's no providers. And I work in a district where we do a lot of contracting with private providers because we're a virtual school across the state. And I've had kids wait 8 months out of a school year for a behavior interventionist because of staffing. Like, we were on it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you're not going to get me anything.
Right.
And even if you are, it doesn't mean they're the right fit for my family.
Right.
So, so I don't hear it as much, but I'm really, really picky. I'm looking for a neuro-optometrist for my daughter. And I spoke with one on a consult and, told her my story right off the bat. She's like, I can tell a whole lot about the brain. Here's what I know. The chiropractor we saw who trains other chiropractors, she had heard of her. And I was like, cool. I called another one. He wanted to charge me $89 just to talk to him. And I was like,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
no, I'm not down with that. We'll go to the person who I think is going to be a good fit,
Mm-hmm.
but it shouldn't be that way. All the things we found that are really helpful, none of them are covered by insurance.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Another broken system.
Yeah. Well, and you have all these big systems and they don't talk to one another. So we're missing this huge opportunity to truly collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
And then the medical system's the same. Oh, you don't know anything. You're not a doctor.
Right.
So we're not going to cover that. Like,
Right.
we treat people as stupid. And some of the smartest people I know, the best parent advocates I have ever met, had no degrees in
Right.
anything.
Right. And
But they
I
took the
wish,
time to learn what they needed to know.
yeah, I wish that no matter what the field, and I know I have been guilty of this as a teacher, especially an early on teacher, sort of trying to plant my own feet in
Mm-hmm.
a way, that if somebody said, well, have you thought about it this way? I'd be like, well, I'm the teacher. I have the teaching degree. But slowly over time, I realized, like you said, the parents especially, they are with that individual child every day. They are a fabulous resource. I am not going to know everything there is to know about their child. So for them to bring those suggestions to me, I should be listening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even no matter what the field is, we we have to be open because somebody, even though they may not know anywhere close to what the expert or the person who is doing the thing knows, that doesn't mean that what their suggestion is would be a wrong suggestion.
Yep.
And I guess it's a pride, I guess it's a protection of self type of thing. But if I had this conversation with my brother just recently where he was like, well, if I'm a woodworker and he's a cabinet maker, and he's like, and somebody comes in and tells me how to do a cabinet that has no cabinetry experience, I'm not going to listen to them. I'm like, but they might have a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they don't have the experience, you can still, like, it happens that somehow they've gotten the knowledge and they figured it out. Like, oh, well, have you looked at it like this?
Some of my biggest wins in teaching came from a kid telling me that.
Yeah.
What if we did this? And it's, there's beauty in multiple perspectives. And even if you don't have the explicit knowledge in that area, you've got some level of understanding to bring forth a perspective. And maybe you don't know the fancy label or the acronym.
Right.
And I don't know of a profession that doesn't have too many acronyms.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
when we finally can truly collaborate, I think that's when the wins happen, regardless of the system. And I saw Fran's comment about being the connector of the systems, and she's spot on. Parents
Yeah.
really, truly, like, they are having to navigate all of these systems to pull together the appropriate support for their kids. And it's hard. I mean, I haven't had to connect as many systems as some other families I know. And truly amazing to watch parents do this. And it's like I have so much respect because they have so much knowledge.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I'm kind of thinking of the answer a little bit to Fran's question earlier about, how do we change the system? And I think it's programs like what you and I went through with the Master IEP Coach Mentorship,
Yep.
where Catherine Witcher is always training another group of people to help in that fight to get in and collaborate and talk to schools and talk to parents and say, you know what, we do need to change this system. We do need to alter this or look at it this way, or think outside the box a little bit differently. And I mean, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say all of education is broken,
No.
because all of education is not broken. All of the medical system is not broken. All of the insurance system is not broken. But we do need, like you said earlier, one student at a time, one individual at a time, slowly start to change things, because we're just not doing a service as good as we could be doing it in all of those systems that we talked about and so many others. And what you and Fran mentioned, as I said, I think I had it, the anxiety growing up. My daughter has anxiety, but I didn't have to connect. That's a great way to say that. You become the connector of systems. Because yeah, you're right. You go to the doctor and you tell them what's happening at school, and then you come home. I mean, you come to school and you tell them what's happening at home and what the doctor said, and then you say, well, last year this happened, and with this teacher this happened, and you bring all of that information, and you as the parent are the only one who has that. And but it is a huge burden to bear. And what you said a few minutes ago about that you thought you were going to have to move into two households in order to make your family work. I've heard that before. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I had someone, or maybe it's an upcoming guest, that had talked about the same thing. Like, they literally moved themselves and one of their children into a hotel, and the rest of the family stayed in the house. Again, that's another reason for my book, is because the lives of your family and all the families are so different, but they have so many similarities. But I felt like there was such a need for an appreciation and an understanding that would hopefully help all of us get better at intertwining the systems and collaborating and understanding.
Well, and it's one of those, like, it doesn't get talked about. So, when you're locked in your house and your child is in such a state of dysregulation that they're screaming the house down and yelling help, and you're frantically closing windows and praying nobody hears. It's not then go down the street and chat with your neighbors about, like, oh, what'd you do last afternoon? So it
Right.
becomes very, very isolating to be in some of these difficulties. And, or we noticed who was willing to hang out with us as things got harder, shifted and flowed. And then it makes sense because we see kids do it with behaviors. We do it as adults. When we get stressed, we start to pull in and we try to control.
Right.
And so sometimes it's with an outward behavior. Like, if I elope from the classroom, I've got to get myself out of this system or this situation. I'm in fight or flight.
Right.
As an adult with a few more skills, a fully developed prefrontal cortex, it might be, I've got to clean and organize my pantry. Because
Yep.
if my pantry is neat and tidy, then all is right with the world and it doesn't matter what else is going on. So
Right.
we are no different as adults than children. We just, in theory, have a different set of tools that we're using. And so, same thing, when you have a child who is having big behavioral episodes, or it could be any need, your world starts to get really, really, really small, because this is what you can control and this is how you survive. And so, it's hard. So then you're in this isolated state. And we had very, very good friends who had no clue what our lives were actually like, because it's just, I'm very open, but it's hard too, because you do get, even the most well-meaning person can be judgmental.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter the life situation. If you're not walking it, you just truly don't get it. And
Yeah.
so there are situations, not even just in my parenting journey, just my life journey, that have shaped the way I will interact with people. We actually have a whole infertility story before I was able to get pregnant. And
Oh wow.
so the number of times people asked me like, "Oh, when are you guys going to start having kids?" Who were well-meaning, had wonderful hearts,
Right.
but had no idea
Yeah.
that we had like been really trying hard to do this.
Yeah.
So like I never ask someone that because
Right.
it's not my business for one. And so society says, cool, it's, when you're getting married, when you're having kids and all
Right.
that,
Right.
but the same comes around like people can mean well, but how do you ask someone, hey, it was a little noisy at your house last week for like 2 hours. Are you okay? Like they
Yeah.
just don't. And so there's so many special needs families walking in this isolation. And there was a time like in our church where I was like, no, we need to figure out how to support these families, because I had a children's pastor tell me one day my child needed to take a break from church. And children's ministry was like that 1 hour a week where I got to just be an adult. And in theory, my kids were in supportive care. And I looked at her and I said, if my child can't come to church, I can't come to church, because the nursing mom's room is not appropriate for my 3-year-old, or I think he was 4 or 5 at that time. And so, I think people mean well, and
Yeah.
they just don't know. And we all there's things like, I know a lot about living with a child with behavior. I don't know a lot about living with a child with Down syndrome. And so I'm as guilty as the rest of
Yeah.
doing that. But, it's that's another one, is we have to start talking about some of these difficulties too, because I think people just are largely unaware of what life is like for families that have special needs.
And that's kind of what Fran and I try to do with our Friday
Mhm.
with Fran episodes, because she has lived it, so she talks about it from the parent perspective and I talk about things from the educational perspective.
Yep.
And I'm hoping that that's helping people have, and it certainly helps me, because even though I have the stories in my book and I've had, all these families in my lives, you're still not there every minute,
Mhm.
and even with that, you're not, even your closest friend, your closest sibling, your closest family member, whatever it is that that you really sharing these things with, still doesn't know, because they're not there every minute. um, and it's so you were talking about, it's a difficult conversation to have, like, hey, it was really loud at your house and I heard your child screaming help. What often happens, and as I'm about to say this, I know in my brain, like, I'm going to have people say why you shouldn't say that, but you have the people who are calling children and family services
Mhm.
because they think the child is being abused.
Yep. And I know people that has personally happened to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's a whole, like, I've heard stories of that going horribly wrong,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. And it's that systemic piece again.
Right.
So that was one of the, when we've hit those hard places in life, whether it's fertility, whether it's parenting, that I always decided, okay, I'm going to be transparent, because the moms who came along who were further ahead in a journey and were transparent were invaluable to hope, like just knowing I can get there. So if I can do that for another family that's just starting out, it's a gift I get to give. As much as there are parts of our journey that I would desperately like to forget, at the same time, I desperately don't want to forget where we came from, because it's led us to where we are today, which is
Right.
a very, very different spot. I no longer have a fear of a hole in a wall in my current home. I no longer live in a home that had patched holes.
Yeah.
Like, but before we left that house, I took pictures of every single one of them, because, good, bad, or otherwise, it's our story. And we wouldn't be where we were today without the journey that we had walked on. And so, I do find, because it's one thing when it's, my personal fertility story and it's me, it's
Mm-hmm.
a very different story to tell when it's my children, and in this world of social media. So I'm learning the art of that. And
Right.
we've been very upfront. We never ever attributed something to this is my child's struggle. It was always, this is what our family is walking through. This is what, because it does, disability does not just impact the person who holds the label or carries the challenge. It impacts the entire family. And so we had challenges together. We've had wins together. It's really fun now that my son is older and has developed a much stronger skill set. Now we're working on advocating for himself and helping him to kind of have the words that match kind of what he's feeling, and how do we proactively do that. And but it's hard too, because on the surface to the world, we don't look like we have any challenges anymore, and we live in a place where nobody knew us in that season of life. And
Right.
so I'm still having, like, we're going into middle school next year, and I did a lot of proactive advocating to prepare for that transition, because he's 11 and we're still not super great about thinking ahead. And I'm like, you don't do well in crowds, and there are 800 kids at this school.
Oh, wow.
Like, and this is,
Yeah.
this is what he can visualize right now, because the elementary school did all of the, neighborhood school preparation. And
Mhm.
so, we've given him some choice, and this is where he wants to go. But I was running crazy back of the scenes in May with setting, talking with the principal about the possibility of blended, some home based, some school based, connecting with the counselor, so that, we're going to do a transition 504. We're not going to just let you pass paper, to
Right.
prepare, because I know for him, we had a 60-day struggle with this new school of refusals and increase in behaviors. And, like, we can't do that year after year. That is
Right.
not going to work. So what
Right.
can we do now to prepare for that? And, my sister's like, you're crazy. Just let them be kids. And I'm like, yeah, you don't get it.
Right. And,
She
and
will, and
well
I'm
meaning,
absolutely love her, but
yeah.
she hasn't been on our journey. And so,
Right.
and she's right. Like, there are times where she is spot on. Like, I need to just let my kids be kids, because when you've been through those crises, and when you have had to be hyper vigilant about every little thing, we are in a place where we can handle a little more cognitive flexibility.
Right.
But, like, I'm really working on me and not limiting myself in the fear of we might go back to where we came from. And so, there's times where she's caught me dead in her tracks with that, and I'm like, oh, you're right. It's okay. I don't need to jump in right now. And there's other times where I'm like, no, I do. You don't get it. And so,
Right.
it's just part of that. You don't really know unless you're in someone's shoes themselves, which we just can't be. So
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Abby, it's almost time to close.
I
I
told
mean,
you we could talk all day.
yeah, I mean, I knew when, you told me brain-based learning and behavior, I'm like, oh, this could be like 6 or 7 hours. And
Oh, for sure, for sure.
yeah, but I want to make sure that, you have opportunity. I don't have a slide with your website, but I am going to put it in here.
Okay.
It's just abbybutcher.com, correct?
Yes, Abbey with me.
So can you tell our audience how else they can find you if they don't go to your website, or if they do go to your website, like, what do you offer? What sort of services can they expect with you?
So I am on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not the world's most active, so you can reach me on there. It's a challenge for me to be active like that. However, as far as services, as I mentioned earlier, my niche is behavior. So I love to help families that kiddos are struggling with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges within the school system. Usually, these are going to be families that are having a behavior plan, or there's discussion of a behavior plan, or they're getting lots of suspensions or behavior notes, things like that. More often than not, families that end up kind of seeking me out, they've got an invisible disability, and they're struggling with helping the school to understand that. So I offer free consultations to anyone, because I think it's important for not only me to make sure I can serve you, but you to make sure that I'm the right fit for your family. And the beautiful part about the coaching network is, if it's not me, I can refer you to someone who is likely going to be a good fit. But then I do one-on-one coaching. I will attend IEP meetings. I have a premium package where we do some proactive meetings. So we meet every month to kind of look at data. And, like I have a family, we're meeting next week to kind of put together a homeschool communication plan, like actually put it together so they can take it to the teacher in the fall as an idea and start the conversation that way. So it's really customized around what families need. They usually just buy a coaching package, and then we use that time based on what are their needs within their child's IEP.
Awesome. It's time to go.
I know.
We may have to do this again sometime. Join me next week. Michelle Vasquez will be with me. She is another Master IEP coach. June was Master IEP Coach Month. It wasn't done that way, but it turned out to be that way. So take care, everybody. We will see you next week.
Bye.